Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I'm going to be showing to you guys how to build a full stack application using React and Firebase where the users are going to be able to track their expenses. Now, you've probably seen a project similar to this in the past, and the reason why I chose this project for this video is because it isn't that long, you can see by the length of the video, but also it teaches you a lot of the good fundamentals that are important with any full stack application. Now, differently from how I usually make my videos, I'm going to be focusing a lot on establishing good practices while writing my code. So although there might be simpler ways to do certain things I'm going to be making in this video, I'm going to teach you guys how someone working in the industry would actually build it. That means since we're using React, I'm going to be creating a lot of custom hooks, organizing the code in a way such that it's efficient for multiple people to collaborate in, and just make it high quality code. If you're interested in just checking out the code, it's totally fine by me. The code will be in the description. I'm going to give you guys a demo real quick right here. What we're building is like I said, an expense tracker application. The UI isn't perfect. I try to make it as cool as it can be. However, like I said many times in the past, I'm not perfect with CSS. That's not what I usually do. So for me, it really doesn't matter. It's more about the functionality, right? So this is how the application goes. You can sign in with Google. You guys can add other ways to sign in as well. Then you can choose your account. I'm going to choose this one over here, and as you can see, it will log into your account over here, and it should keep track of your previous expenses, whatever you did. You can see one thing that in my opinion looks kind of weird now is just that the picture is kind of pixelated, but that isn't a problem with the code in itself. It's just that for some reason I put a picture that is pixelated with this Google account. What this does is it gets the profile picture with whatever email is associated whenever you log in. And you can see it tells us the total balance of our tracking list, how much income we earned, how much expenses we expensed, right? And the list of transactions that happened. So if I, for example, went to, I don't know, I just did a paint job. I'll put over here, paint job. And I actually did this to a friend who offered me $200. I would come over here and do this. I would choose between income or expenses. In this case, I'm gaining $200, so it is income. I'm going to click on add transaction, and you'll see my balance increased, my income increased, and this transaction is down here at the bottom. But if I decided that for some reason I want to buy a gift for a friend, I can put over here gift, and then put that it cost, I don't know, $80, and then put expense. You'll see that same thing happens. A gift appears over here, and our balance should have decreased. So it also works like there's a lot of minor details that I made sure to add to this so that we can make this look as good as it can be. For example, if I had to pay rent and for some reason the rent was like $2,000, the thing will become negative. So the actual thing handles the negative sign over here, and where the dollar sign appears over here. All of that you'll see as we play along and we code in our project. And by the end, if you want to change your account, you can just click on sign out. And remember that all of this is persistent per your page, right? It is all stored, in this case, on the local storage. So you can log out, you can refresh the page, you can change tabs. It doesn't matter. It will keep all the data saved. So this is basically the project we're going to be building. Before we get into the video, if you could leave a like and subscribe, I would massively appreciate it. And let's get into the video. Before we get into the video, I would like to talk a little bit about today's sponsor, Skillshare. For those who don't know, Skillshare is an amazing online learning platform that has literally transformed my approach to coding. As you might know, I have a great relationship with Skillshare since they have been supporting my channel for a while now. However, this relationship started way before my first video because, as you might know, I am a self-taught developer and I actually used Skillshare to tune and improve some of the skills that I was lacking through my learning journey. For example, I remember I always had issues with CSS, as you might know through my videos, but I decided to take this fantastic course called Modern CSS, Writing Better, Cleaner, More Scalable Code by the author Harry Roberts. And not only did it help me fine-tune my skills, but it literally changed the way I approached CSS coding as a whole. I literally can't recommend it enough. But Skillshare is not just about CSS or coding. It also offers thousands of inspiring classes on everything from illustration to entrepreneurship. The best part of all of this is that you can literally access all of this for free. Yes, you literally heard me right. Skillshare is offering a 1-month free trial for the first 1,000 of you guys who decide that you want to explore and learn from their incredible class library. But one of the coolest things, in my opinion, with the Skillshare platform is the fact that you can get rewarded with badges and certificates as you progress with your learning. That way, not only can you track your own progress and understand where you stack up compared to other people, but also you're able to show off those certificates to future employers or anyone who is interested in judging your skills and abilities. I personally know people who've put their Skillshare certificates on their LinkedIn because of the respect and prestige that Skillshare has in the overall industry. So I kind of have this challenge for you all. If you have any skills or anything related to programming or even outside of programming, it's always good to improve your different skills. You should go try at least 1 month of Skillshare, take control of what you're learning and redefine what you're actually working with, set new goals and see what you can achieve from all of this. Again, thank you Skillshare for sponsoring this video. If you guys want to check it out, don't forget to check out the link in the description. Now let's get into the video. Okay everyone, so let's start writing the code for this video. Differently from a lot of my videos, I'm gonna literally start everything from scratch. The only thing that I won't be focusing on this video is the CSS, which is standard for me, because the video's purpose is to just focus on the functionality and the technologies that we're learning and not having to spend 30 minutes writing like CSS that maybe you guys won't even copy at the end of the day. But I did write CSS for this, as you guys saw in the beginning. So as I go through the video, I'll be pasting some CSS. I will be writing the class names for each element, and I will be leaving all the code in the description if you guys are interested in it. So let's start by building our project. So the way we're going to do this is you can use npm or yarn. I like to use yarn, so I'm going to run yarn create react app, just like this. And then I'm going to put dot because we're going to create everything inside of this folder. So we're going to start out, when this is done, by actually setting up our folder structure first so that you guys can have an idea of how our project will be organized. Okay, as you can see, we just finished our running the command create react app. So now we can actually start working on our project. First of all, I do want to delete some of the files that come with the create react app. I always do this. I want to delete the setup tests, report web vitals, logo, the index.css, and the app.test.js. I do this as always because they're not going to be useful for my video, because we're not going to be testing in this video. I have videos on testing if you guys are interested, and this is not going to be a real project, so it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, and it will make the folder structure a little bit less confusing. I'm also going to clean up some stuff, like deleting the initial boilerplate that comes with the application and some of the imports so that our app can run smoothly. To test out if everything is working, I'm going to just run yarn start, and hopefully in the browser over here, it should reload to an empty white page, as you can see. So what I want is the following. I want to start out by organizing our project in a way that it will make our project efficient to work alone and also efficient to work with other people. Like I said, I'm going to be focusing a lot on best practices and good practices in the long run, so I want to introduce this to you guys. So the way we're going to run this is we're going to have 2 pages in our application, which means we're going to have 2 routes in our application. I like to structure my pages and routes by creating a folder called pages. And in this folder, whenever I have a page, which I'm going to have 2 of them, I will create a folder for each individual page. For example, as you saw in the beginning, we had the first page, which was a page where you can sign in with Google. So I would call that page Authentication or Auth. And then we also have another page, which is where we actually have the dashboard where you can add the transactions and do all the expensing and all the tracking. So with that page, I'm going to call it Expense Tracker, just like this. I wrote expense wrong, so I'm just going to fix it. So I'm going to have those 2 pages. For now, we'll leave those folders empty because we're not going to create the files yet, but we're just creating the structure, right? Then what I also want to have is we're going to be using Firebase for this project. And if you've ever worked with Firebase before, you know that there is a little bit of configuration. Luckily, with Firebase, the configuration is extremely simple and can be done in almost just 1 minute. but we do need some space to store all of the configuration files. And in the future, if we need more configuration files, I can also put all of them inside of the folder called config, which I always like to have inside of my projects. Then what I want to do is finally, we're going to be using some custom hooks to work on this project. So I will create a folder called hooks. If you've never used custom hooks as a way to improve the efficiency and the quality of your code, don't worry, I will be showing you guys exactly how they can help. Just keep in mind that we're gonna have them and we're gonna put them inside of this folder. And now this is pretty much the folder structure done. If you're gonna put components, you can create a components folder. You can add more stuff as you go. You can even put individual hooks inside of the individual pages if they make sense for those pages only. But in this tutorial, this is the structure of what we're going to be working on. Now, what we want to do is we want to start by adding the packages that we're going to be using in this project. And to be honest, for simplicity reasons, we're actually just going to be using two dependencies. So the first one is going to be, and I'm going to add it by running yarn add, I'm going to run react router DOM. This over here is what's going to allow us to have different pages and different routes in our application. I believe you guys are all familiar with this library already, so I won't be going too much in detail about what I'm going to be doing with it, but it's one of the most popular libraries in React, so I expect most of you to already know it. Then we're also going to add Firebase, which, as you might know, it will install everything related to Firebase for us, but we're going to just add those right now and start building our application by actually setting up the initial stages of our Firebase app. So to do that, we're gonna open up the Firebase console inside of our browser. So the way I do this is you go to firebase.google.com and you'll see this probably. You have to probably sign in with a Google account. I already have mine. And I'm gonna go to console by clicking on this button. It's gonna open up your console with a bunch of projects that you have used in the past. This is my Firebase account that I use for my videos. So there's only stuff related to my own personal videos, not really any projects that I work on my own. But I'm going to click on add project over here and we're going to start setting up a new project. Now let's call this expense tracker since it is what we're going to be building, but you can call it whatever you want. Now it's going to ask us if we want to set up Google Analytics for a project. Now, if this was an actual project with like I was going to deploy it, of course I would do this and I do recommend you doing this. But what we're going to be doing is just creating the project and at the end I will deploy it, but it won't be used by anyone. I'll just deploy it to show you guys how to deploy this application. However, we don't need analytics. In your case, you might need it, so I would recommend actually using it. Then we click on create project and it will start creating our project. Whenever this is done, I'll be back to continue. Okay, as you can see, it is done and we know that because it says that it's done. So we're going to continue and we are inside of our dashboard, which is pretty good. So the console for Firebase is really, really intuitive. We have over here on the side, we know that we are inside of our project because it says expense tracker over here. But we also have this thing called build. Over here, you can see all of the different services that Firebase provide to you. So Firebase isn't just a database or isn't just authentication or deployment. It's actually so much more. And I've made so many tutorials on Firebase in the past. You can check them out. But if this is the first time you're working with Firebase, this is what we're going to do. In this app, we're just going to have two services being used. We're going to have authentication and Firestore database. Now, this is for the database. We're going to set that up later. But initially, let's just set up our authentication. I'm going to click on it and it's going to open this up. We're going to click on get started. Then it's going to ask what kind of authentication we want to have. It's really easy to set up any kind of authentication you desire. The one I like the most is Google because everyone has a Google account and you just have to click on your email. I'm going to click enable. Then I'm going to click on my email. Then over here, we're going to click on save and we're going to actually start adding the authentication provider to our project. Now, as you can see, it says that the status for Google Authentication was enabled, which is pretty good and means that we can actually start using our project. However, in order to connect the project that we have in our code, in our VS Studio code, and the project that we have in our console over here, we have to click on Project Overview right over here. And then there's going to be an option over here called Web because we're setting Firebase for a web app. And then over here, it's going to ask us to register our Firebase web app. We're going to give a name. You have to give a good name, in my opinion, just something that is memorable for you. I'm literally going to call it expense tracker just like this. And I'm gonna set up Firebase hosting. The reason why I'll do this is because in the end of the video, I'm gonna be deploying this app. And if you wanna do such thing, you also set up Firebase hosting. Then I'm gonna click on register app, and I'll have to wait a bit until it's done. So now that it's done, it asks us to install Firebase, which we already did. And then it asks us to copy this piece of code. This code over here will be, like I said, the full configuration of Firebase. Like, we're not gonna have to do anything else other than just copy this and paste it into a file inside of our project. So to do that, I'm gonna open this up, go to config, and create a file called firebase-config, just like this, .js. And then over here, I'm just gonna paste the entire code. Now that this is here, I'm gonna save this, and this should already connect everything with our own project. Now, obviously, if you wanna make all of this into environment variables because you're going to post this on GitHub, you can do so. But since I'm going to delete this app right after I post this, it doesn't matter to me. You guys can see my API key and everything related to this. So I'm not going to waste time creating environment variables. But this pretty much configures everything for us. However, we do need to install the Firebase CLI because this is what we're going to be using to actually deploy our website to Firebase. Now it's going to ask us to install the Firebase CLI, which we need to use in order to deploy our app and host it inside of Firebase. If you're using npm, it's really cool. You can just run this command in any one of your actual command lines because you need to install the CLI globally to then use it inside of your project. So since I'm using Yarn, I'm just going to run yarn global add, and then you run Firebase tools. I already have this globally installed, so it doesn't really matter to me. I'm not going to run the command, but you do have to do that if this is the first time you're running this app. I'm going to click next, and then I'm going to go to this options over here. It's going to ask us to deploy our app into Firebase. Now, the reason why it's asking to do this first is because we can test our app already deployed. Obviously, we can prevent people from accessing it, but we can already start doing this process. And I'm going to start doing just the first two, which is having a login to our Firebase account inside of our project and then initiating it. The last one I'm going to leave for the end of the video so that we start the deployment process. So I'm going to run Firebase login. It's going to ask us to log in, and it says I'm already logged in with my email. Now I'm just going to run Firebase init, and it's going to initiate a project for us. We're going to choose which Firebase features. So now there's a couple of things that it's going to ask us to do, which is it's going to tell us to already deploy it to Firebase hosting. I'm going to leave all of this to the end, but I will keep track of the commands that we actually need to use in our project. So this is something I already know the commands nowadays, but back in the day, what I would do is I would come over here and I would just write, okay, I need Firebase login, then Firebase init, and then Firebase deploy. You can also just check the page again, but this is just so you don't forget. We're not going to do those now. We're going to do this later whenever we're done with the project and we start deploying, so we have everything organized. But we're basically done with the setup in our video. Now, what we have to do is we have to start setting up authentication inside of our project. And to do that, we have to first create our authentication page. So let's start setting up React Router DOM in our project. I'm going to zoom in a bit so you guys can see better. We already have installed the package, so I'm just going to import from React Router DOM. And what I'm going to import is, first of all, I'm going to import a browser router and call it a router. I always do this. Then import a route, and then import routes. So if you're not familiar with React Router DOM, just keep in mind that this is the standard syntax for it. Each of these components have a different purpose, and I have a lot of videos with extensive explanations on what each one means. But basically, if you want to set up some routes, we have to first initiate the router in our project to let React know that we have a router. Then we have to distinguish where in our code our routes will be defined by using the routes component. And then inside of here, we can define each route individually by using the route component, the singular route component. And inside of a route, we're just gonna have two routes in our app. We have to define a path, which will just be where, like, how do you set up your URL to go to this route? So the initial route is always gonna be an empty slash because that's the base URL for a website. And I want such that when you go to the website, and you're not logged in, you're just gonna automatically be sent to the authentication page. So the authentication page is gonna be the initial route. I'm gonna set up which component will be rendered when you go to this route by using the element prop over here. And we haven't created the auth page, but we will do that right now in order to pass it over here. We're gonna come to pages and we're gonna create an index.jsx. Now this is gonna be a React component. That's why I called it a JSX. And the reason why I called it index is because the way I like to organize my folders is I already know that this is the authentication component, right? The authentication page, because of the name of the folder. So the file, I'll just call it index to keep everything standard. Then inside of here, I'm gonna export a constant called auth, which will be our component. And at the end, for now, I'll just return a div saying hello world, something like this, right? And then over here at the top, I'll import from the pages folder /auth/index. I'll import the auth component. And all I have to do now is just plug this inside of here by defining the auth component as the component that is going to render when we go to this route. Now you see we put an exact thing over here, and this is just because we want to tell basically our page that this has to match the exact route that we set up in order to go to this route. Then we want over here to define the second route, which is going to be the one with the expense tracker page. So I'm going to set up a path and call it expense tracker. And I'm also going to put a slash over here. Then I want to set up the element, right? But we haven't created the page. So I'm going to do exactly what I did with the auth, which is I'll come over here and I will just copy this page, paste it over here, but then change this to be expense tracker, right? And I also add something over here so we can distinguish with the two pages and kind of know that everything is working, right? So I'll just come over here, set up expense tracker, just like this. And now we just have to import at the top the expense tracker from ./pages/expense tracker/index, right? So we set up our routes and we can check to see if everything is working by coming over here and open this up. And you see that when we are in our basically normal routes, the initial route, we see hello world, which is the auth page. But if we go to /expense tracker, we should see hello world expense tracker, which is pretty nice, which means our routes are working. Now let's start working with the pages individually. I'm going to come over here and we're going to close this and open up the auth page, right? This part over here. Now, like I said, our auth will be pretty simple because it's just going to be a Google authentication. Now, in order to set up Google authentication, I'm going to first give this a class name. Like I said, we're going to be having some CSS, but it's not going to be the focus of the video. And you guys can just copy the class names and copy the CSS later if you're interested in doing that too. But we'll then put a P over here, a P tag, and then just write something like sign in with Google to continue. Then we're going to add a button, which is going to be saying something like sign in with Google. And the button, I'll give it a class name of login with Google button, something like this. And we actually have to set up the function which will sign in with Google. We'll call it sign in with Google. Now, this function seems like it would be hard, but it's actually going to be pretty simple. We're just going to create it over here, and it will actually call a part of our Firebase package, which we have to define over here inside of our config part. So in order to set up authentication in our config, we just have to import some stuff from Firebase. So I'm going to say import from Firebase/auth, because when you're going to import something from a specific service, you just do Firebase/the service, and we're using the authentication service. Now what we want to import is the function getAuth and the Google Auth provider. The getAuth function just determines that you're going to be using authentication in this project, and the Google Auth provider is obviously used for setting up Google specific authentication. Now all we have to do is we'll come down here below the definition of the app, and we'll create a constant called auth and set it equal to get auth, and then pass in the app, and then create a variable called provider and set it equal to new Google Auth provider. And we do need to access those two things elsewhere in this project, so we're going to export both of them, and we'll just come to our auth over here and import both of them by basically just importing from, and then we'll go back once, go back twice, go to config / Firebase config and import the auth and the provider, just like this. Then what I want to do is I want to import some functions from Firebase in itself. So we'll import from Firebase / auth, like we were doing before, and they have a bunch of functions that we can use. Now, a bunch of different sign-in functions. Like I said, you can sign in with Google, you can sign in with your email, with your phone number, however you want. And the one that I want is the one where we sign in with a pop-up, right? I want a pop-up to appear and you click on your email account. So we just write sign in with pop-up, just like this. And over here, we'll just call this. We'll say sign in with pop-up. Now, this is going to be an asynchronous call, so it's going to return a promise. So we do need to make this into an async function, and we're going to create a variable called results, which is going to be equal to the await response of this function. Results will include everything related to the user who just signed in, so we're going to be using this in a bit. The important part is this over here, where in order to sign in with pop-up, we do have to pass in the auth variable and the provider. So for starters, this should be working, and we should console log the results just to kind of see what we're going to get back whenever someone tries to log in. We'll check this out by going to the login page, this one over here, and we see that currently we have over here the text and the button to sign in with Google. But does it actually work? So let's click on this button. You'll see that some emails popped up. We have to choose which one we want to use. Now I'm going to choose this email over here, and hopefully when it's done logging in, it should return back, as you can see, information about this user. So as you can see, it's an object called user credential, and there's a part of the object called user, which if we click there, it actually contains a bunch of information about the user. This is a fake email account I have, which includes a display name for the user, an email, information like a profile picture, and much more, but we're only going to be using those three things. So we can see that we actually have the information coming back and we're actually logging in. So what do we want to do with this information? Well, what I want is I want to keep track of a couple of things. I want to keep track of the user ID, the name of the user, the profile picture, and if the user is logged in or not, because those are the things that we need in our app. So what we want to do is we want to actually store a bunch of information inside of our local storage. The reason why we want to do that is because if you go over here and go to local storage, it's on the application tab, and you go over here, there's nothing right here. But what this does is whenever a user log in, the first time they log in and we save the information to the local storage, they can close the tab, they can refresh the tab, they can switch tabs, they can leave the computer and come back, and that information will be kept there, meaning that they don't have to sign in again. It's a way to persistently keep the user logged in. Now, it's not the safest way to do it. I would actually recommend using cookies, but to make things simple, I'm going to store it in the local storage. They're not that different to handle with, so we can do this by just coming over here inside of our code and actually just saying that we want to set an item to the local storage. Now, what item do we need to set? Well, I want to set an item called auth, and I want this to be an object full of information regarding the user. Now, if you've known or worked with local storage before, you know that you can't store objects. You can only store booleans, strings, and numbers, I believe. So what we want to do is we want to turn the object into a string and then turn it back whenever we need it as an object again. So this is a very common way to do this. We're going to actually create the object over here that we want to keep for the user. So we're going to call this auth info and set it equal to an object. And then the object, what we want from it is we actually want an object that has a user ID, which is going to be equal to the result from our user signing in, dot user, if you recall we had a user object, dot UID. This is the ID that we get. How do I know that this is the path to it? Well, if we go to the console, you remember we have the object, we go .user, and then we go .uid. And we're going to do the same thing for the display name and the photo URL. So we'll just come over here, set up the name to be equal to results.user.displayName, and then the profile photo to be results.user. I think is it profile photo? Is photo URL, just like this. I also want to know if the user is logged in or not, because this is important. So say is auth is equal to true, because we're logging in, right? And then we have this object. What I want is I want to set the local storage item to be equal to this object, right? But as I just said, you can't do this because you can't store an object inside of a local storage. So what we need to do is we need to use a function from JSON called json.stringify. And this function turns any objects into a string, which can then be stored into the local storage. So this should pretty much be good. We're going to test to see if this is working by trying to log in again, by clicking on this and then clicking on the email we want to log in. We're going to check out to see if it's console logged. It wasn't because we removed the console log, because now we're actually just storing it in the local storage. And you'll see that it is over here. We have, as you can see, an auth key inside of our local storage with a value of a string that kind of looks like a JSON object, but it's actually a string in the format of a JSON object. With the JSON package over here, we will actually be able to turn that back into an object later on. But this means that everything seems to be working. What we want to do after this is, right after you log in, we don't want to keep the user inside of the sign-in page. We actually want to navigate them towards the expense tracker page because they just logged in. So in order to redirect you to another page, we're going to be using something from React Router DOM called the navigate function. So we're going to go to import from React Router DOM, and we're going to import a hook called the use navigate hook, just like this. Now, up here at the top, we're going to define a variable called navigate and set it equal to the use navigate hook. I'm actually going to call this a constant just for standardizing purposes. But basically this function, whenever we call it by just doing this, we can actually put over here a route to which we want to navigate towards, and it will take the user there. So I'm going to put that we want to go to the expense tracker page, and you'll see that whenever I log in, and I'll try logging in again, now we just choose the email we want to log in with, and you'll see that we're now redirected to the expense tracker page, which is perfectly exactly what we wanted. Now it's time to start working on the expense tracker page. So we're going to go back to the index.js file that we created for it. Currently, we don't have anything, but we're pretty much done with the authentication page. We just have this text saying hello world expense tracker, but we want to add a lot more to this page. What we want to do is we want to set up the structure for how this page is going to look like. I'm going to delete this, and I want to add over here a div, and we're going to call it, I'm going to add a class name, and we're going to call it expense tracker, just like this. Then I want to come over here and add another div and call it container. I'm going to just delete this and add a name with a class name of container. Now inside of here, we're going to add an h1 tag that is going to say expense tracker. We're later going to add the user's name over here, but for now we'll just keep it like this. And we're then going to add a div, which is going to display the balance, the total balance for the user's expenses together with the user's total income and the user's total expense. So we're going to add a class name to this and call it balance because it's the balance part of our app. And then I want to add an h3 tag saying your balance. Then down here, we're going to add some sort of number for now. It's going to be an hdo tag to do this. But for now, we'll just say that the balance is 0.00, right? But we're going to obviously add the actual dynamic balance in here. And then we're going to add another div together with the summary of both the income and the expenses. We're going to give it a class name of summary. and we're gonna add another div for the income and a div for the expenses, right? So I'm gonna call this income and I'm gonna call this expenses. Okay, so expenses. And for the income, I'm gonna add an H4 tag because it's even smaller, and it's gonna be called income. And I'm gonna add a P tag to display the income. So a paragraph tag, which for now, again, similar to the balance, I'll just put 0.00. I'll copy this and paste it over here and just change this to expenses. And we should see that it's starting to kind of look like what we want. But obviously, all the CSS hasn't been added yet, and a lot more should be added to this website. So now that we pretty much set up the top part of this page, we're gonna start creating the form that is gonna be used to add a transaction. So I'm gonna create an actual form. I'm gonna call this form add transaction. And then over here, we're just gonna add an input, which will be of obviously type text. And then I'll put a placeholder for it so that the users can know what you're gonna type here. And it's gonna be the description of the transaction. So like the name. So like if you added a haircut, it's gonna be haircut, you know, something like that. We're gonna make it required because you do have to do this in order to finish the form. And for now, we'll just keep it like this. I'm gonna copy and paste it again because we need 2 of them. The second one is gonna be for the amount of the price, right? Of the expense or the income, whatever you choose to use. And it's not gonna be of type text, it's gonna be of type number because this is gonna be a number. It's also gonna be required. So it's pretty much set like this. Then we need to add the radio buttons in order to determine whether it's an expense or an income, right? So we're gonna add an input of type radio. And since this is a radio button, it's a bit different. We're gonna add an ID over here of expense and a value of expense, since this is gonna be the expense one. And for now, we'll just remove this and also not add anything else, but we're gonna add more stuff for all the inputs, to be honest, because we're gonna have to make them dynamic and save the information in each of them. Then for the radio button for income, we're just gonna change this to income and this to income as well. Now for each of these radio buttons, we do need a label to them. So I'm gonna add a label to say exactly what they are. The first one is for expenses and the second one is for income, just like this. And we have to attribute each of the labels by using the HTML4 property. So this is for the expense one. So we just copy the ID of this one and put it over here. And this is for the income one. So we just copy the ID of the income one and put it over here. So now we have our form pretty much done. All we need is a button to submit the form. So we're gonna create a button and give a type of submit so that whenever we submit this form, it knows that it will be submitted whenever you click on this button. And we're gonna write a text saying add transaction, just like this. Let's check to see how it looks. And it looks kind of cool, but it's obviously not the format and structure that we'll look at the end, but it looks like we pretty much set up the skeleton of this. Now we also want to have the transactions part of it, which is gonna be a list of transactions. And the way I structured my UI made it such that I'm actually gonna put the transactions part outside of this major expense tracker div over here. We're gonna create a separate div called transactions. And the reason why I added this fragments, if you don't know, is because whenever you're returning, you need to return only one thing, right? So you can't return a div with the expense tracker and then another div being its sibling. You have to just return a fragment with 2 sibling divs, right? And then over here at the bottom, we're just gonna give this a class name of transactions, just like this. And for now, we're just gonna add an H3 tag saying transactions, just to keep in mind that we do have to add this later on. Now, I pretty much want to start adding the functionality to be able to add the transactions. Now, the reason why I want to add the transactions before I'm able to see the transactions is because how am I going to see a transaction if I haven't added one yet, right? So the way we're going to do this is we're going to start setting up our database inside of Firebase. So to do that, it's pretty simple. We're just going to open up the build thing over here and go to the Firestore database service. Then it's going to open this up. Similar to the authentication, we're going to click on this button, which is the create database button. Then it's going to ask us if we want to start this in production mode or in test mode. Since we are actually working and we're going to be deploying this, I'm actually going to choose production mode, but there's only one minor change that I need to do in order to get things running on production, which is to add this over here in the rules part of the database. If you're not familiar, I'll explain in a bit, but basically I'm going to choose next over here. Then it's going to ask us to choose the Firestore location. Well, Firebase has a lot of locations, right? That's what makes it very reliable. And to be honest, I live next to the US. I live in Canada. So this is the closest part to me. So I'm going to choose this one. Make sure you choose one that makes sense to you and your users because you can't change it later. So I'm going to click on enable and it's going to start creating our Firestore database. Okay, so I finished creating everything. And as you can see, this is what we can see. This is basically the dashboard for your database. And Firebase kind of uses a NoSQL approach to data. So it's not like you're using MySQL or Postgres or anything like that. It's a bit different. We have collections and documents. A collection would be almost like a table in a SQL database. And in our case, we're just going to have one collection. The collection is actually going to be called transactions, right? Because we're going to keep track of all the transactions that happen. I'm going to click next, and it's going to ask us to create our first transaction. To be honest, I'm just going to click auto ID over here and create it. You do have to create your first one, but we're not going to use it. The transaction that we're going to have is actually a different one. So I'm just going to delete this document over here. Documents would be like an entry or a row in a SQL database, if you're not familiar with this. Now, we pretty much created the structure of our collection. In order to get it working, we do have to change the rules, remember, because this is working in production. Now, what are the rules in a Firestore database? Well, Firestore actually allows something really cool, which is for you to determine who is able to make changes inside of your database. So you can allow them to be able to read, write, update, delete. You can allow them specify exactly what kind of interactions you want the users to have with your database. As of right now, it is set by default to only allow users to read and write the database if false, which means that it will never allow any user to read or write in the database because false is never true. So it's almost like a coding language over here just for the rules section of the Firestore database. For now, we want to allow every single user to be able to make a change because this website is pretty simple and I don't need to actually specify anything. To be honest, I do whenever it's an important project, but for this, we're just going to set it to true such that everyone can do whatever they want and add and read the database. That doesn't mean that they have access to your database. That just means that if they go into your project and they try to add a transaction, they will have writing rights to be able to do that and reading rights to see the transactions. So this is pretty much resolved. We'll come back to our data. And we have to think about what kind of data do we want in our collection, right? So we already have a collection. I believed we had actually. Did it change? Maybe it got deleted for some reason. So we'll create the collection again. I'll call it transactions and we'll do the exact same thing we just did before. Okay, it's been created and we'll just delete this document. So basically we already created our transactions, but what do we want each document to have? Well, I kind of want to keep track of the following. I want to keep track of the user who made the transaction, so the user ID of the user. I want to keep track of the description of the transaction, the transaction amount, also the transaction type, so whether it's income or an expense, and also when was this transaction created, so that when we display the list of transactions, we display it in order by the date it was created, right? So we want to keep track of all of them. And to do that, it's pretty easy. we want to just create a function that is going to add a new document to this collection. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, I'm actually going to create what is known as a custom hook to handle all of the adding transactions functionality in our project. So for those who don't know, a custom hook is just React function. Is not a component because it's not returning JSX. It's actually going to return data. But this function is going to use, it has access to all of the hooks that come with React, which is pretty nice because it will return data and it's almost like a helper function, but it also has access to React tools, right? So in this case, we want to call this use add transaction. Now, if you're not familiar to custom hooks, just know that every hook has to start with the name use. So this is why it's called like this. And it's standard that whenever you want to add the functionality to add things into your project, you call it something like this, use add transaction. Then over here, we're going to create a function called use add transaction. And for now, it won't return anything. It'll just return an empty object. Just like this, right? But inside of this hook, what we want to do is we want to create a function called add transaction. And it's going to deal with Firebase, so it has to be an async await function. And at the end over here, we're just going to return this function. Now, inside of here, what we want to use is this function from Firebase called add_doc. So I'm going to import from Firebase/Firestore, and I want to import the function add_doc. Now, add_doc, as you might know by the name, means add document, and we need to await add_doc. Whatever data we put in here will determine what kind of document we're adding to our collection. Now, the first thing we need over here is what is known as the specification or a reference to which collection we want to add a document to. So you see over here, we only have one collection called transactions, but we might have many of them. So in our code, we have to specify which collection we're trying to add a document to. And in order to do that, we're actually going to import the collection function over here. Now, we have to make a reference to that collection by calling it transaction collection ref, right? It's a reference to the transaction collection. And we're going to set it equal to collection. Now, the first thing we have to put over here is actually something we haven't created yet. We have to go to our config file over here and import at the top from Firebase/Firestore something called get Firestore. Now, get Firestore will allow us to create this variable similar to the auth variable, but instead called db, which means it's a reference to our database inside of our code. So we're going to say db is equal to get Firestore, and we're going to pass in the app over here. Now, over here, we need to import that db variable by saying import from config/Firebase config, and then db. Now, we're going to press enter, and we're just going to put db inside of this thing. Then, in order to actually reference the correct collection, we have to put the name of the collection over here. If you recall, we called it transactions, as you can see. So this is what we add over here. Now, we do have a reference to that collection. We just put it inside of the add_doc function, right? We just copy this and put it over here. Then what we have to put over here is the data or the object we want to add to this document. So like I said, we want the following. We want a user ID to be something, right? We want to also pass in the description of the transaction. We want to add the transaction amount. So I'm going to put amount over here, which will be a number. And we also want to add the transaction type, which is going to be a string. And finally, we want to add a property called created at, which is going to be some sort of like timestamp given by Firebase. Actually, all of this over here, we'll have to get it somewhere, but the created at is Firebase already allows us, it gives a function that will give us this information. This function, we can actually just import it from Firestore over here. It's called server timestamp. What this function does is it literally, whenever you call this function, it will give you a timestamp of the current moment where the function was called. So if I put it over here, we'll know exactly when this was created at, and it will make sense based on Firebase time standards. So now all we need is this information. Well, let's think about this through. This is called add transaction. And where I'm actually going to call this is in the expense tracker component. I'm going to come over here at the top. I'm going to import the hook like this. Import from /, then go back and then go to hooks and then go to use add transaction. And I'm going to import the use add transaction hook. Then over here, I'm going to create a constant, set it equal to use add transaction. And we're just going to get back the add transaction function. Now, what we want is to call this function whenever this form is submitted. So we have all of the data that the user is trying to use to add the transaction, such as what kind of transaction it is, so the transaction type, also the description and the amount. All of that we're going to have inside of this component, meaning that if we really want to have access to that data over here, we can technically just pass in as arguments to this add transaction function, meaning that over here we can accept an object containing the description that we want to add to the transaction amount, and also the transaction type. So this 3 fields over here that we still have left, we can just get it directly from the arguments and the parameters of this function. So we can just delete this and it will be passed down from whenever we call this function. Now the last one we need is the user ID. Now to get the user ID, we have to get it from our local storage, right? Because if you recall, when we sign in, we set it over here. But since it's a lot of work to constantly, whenever I want my user ID to just get the item from the local storage and then convert it into an object, because if you recall, it's a string right now in the local storage. Since we have to do that, I don't want to do this every single time I want to use the user ID. I want to have a compact way to always have the information done. So I'm going to create another hook called useGetUserInfo. And what this is going to do is it's going to actually, whenever you call this, it's going to return back an object containing all of the user info inside of the local storage, but as an object, not an actual stringified object. So I'm gonna come over here, say export const useGetUserInfo, which is gonna be a function, of course. And this hook is actually gonna be pretty simple. We're gonna come over here and basically set this equal to json.parse. And what json.parse does is it basically transforms a stringified object, in like we used the json.stringify before, back into an object, right? So it's basically the other way around from what we did to put this into the local storage. So what I put inside of here is local storage.getItem, and we put in the auth key over here because this is what we called when we set this item. So we're just parsing this JSON and it will come back as an object. But we will destructure the object with the information that we want. So we know that in the local storage, we stored a name, a profile, photo, a user ID, and also is auth variable. Over here at the bottom, we want to return this separately. Now, the reason why we want to return this separately is because sometimes I just need the profile photo, sometimes I just need the user ID. We want to have this quick and easy so that when you call this hook, you only get the specific thing that you want, right? So right now, this is pretty much done. That means that in the use add transaction, if I want to have access to the user ID that was in the local storage, all I have to do is just import this hook. So import use from /useGetUserInfo, import the hook, and then just say const equal to useGetUserInfo, and just get the user ID from this, and then just put this over here, right? Just like this. It will automatically use this if I just delete that. So you see, we basically condensed and abstracted all of this logic into a simple hook that we can just call and get the info back. Now, we already did 2 custom hooks so far in this project. right? And you might be asking yourself, maybe, what is the point of this? Couldn't we have just created the add transactions function inside of this component over here and handled all of the logic? Why are we doing all this extra work of putting it in another file and making it into a custom hook? Well, because to be honest, in the real world, when you want to create your components, you want to separate the logic from the UI. I think about this component, the expense tracker one, as mostly for UI, as you can see, right? The logic should exist separately so that when you test your components, you can test the UI of this component, and separately you can test the logic of this hook, right? They're separate things. So this is why people usually like to add custom hooks. It also makes this whole logic very reusable, because if I had created the add transactions function over here and I needed to add a transaction in another component, it would probably have to do something like add this into a context, or maybe like pass this as props, something crazy like that. But to be honest, all we need to do now is just call this hook and it should all be good. So we basically finished the use add transactions hook, but we don't know if it's working yet. The only way to know if it's working is by trying to call it over here. By default, I wanna just try calling it once. I'm gonna create a function called onSubmit, which will be called whenever the form is submitted. And I'm gonna make it an async function, like always, because it's gonna call something. Then I'm gonna basically paste it inside of this form and give this an onSubmit, as you can see. Now, since this is a form, if we submit it, it will automatically try to refresh the page, and it's something that we don't want. So we always just prevent default like this, right? Then I want to call the add transaction function right after this, because when we submit the form, we want to submit the transaction. Right now, I'm not currently getting the data from the inputs yet. We're going to do this in a second. But before we get that, I want to test out to see if the add transaction function is working by just feeding this some fake data. So the first fake data I want to add is for the description. Let's pretend that we're adding a haircut, right? So I'll just force feed some data over here. Let's say the transaction amount is 22. And let's say that the transaction type is equal to expense. Now, if I click on this button, hopefully we should see a new document in the transactions collection. But it seems like it deleted the collection, which happens whenever you create the collection too early and you spend a lot of time not adding anything to it and with no data in it. So basically Firebase just deletes it. But that's not a problem. We just create the collection for the third time. We're gonna call it transactions and do the exact same thing we've done before. Fake a piece of data, save it, and then just delete this. And what I want to do is, we see there's no data in here, right? The transactions thing is still alive, as you can see, but there's no data. So we're going to come over here, click on add transaction. I'm even going to open up the console just to see if there's any errors that appear. I'm going to click on add transaction, and oh, it's asking me to fill this up, even though it's not going to use the data from this, but it's fine. I'm going to click on add transaction, and let's see if the data is here. It seems like something was added. A document was added. If I click on it, it seems like it was correctly added. We have the haircut as a description, the amount as the number, the expense as the transaction type, and my user ID, and also the date of when I created this. So the use transaction hook or the use add transaction hook is working perfectly. Now we just have to get this data from the form instead of brute forcing it like this. Now to add the data to the form, I already created the states, and I'm just gonna explain to you guys. So these are the states we're gonna be using. So we're gonna be using one for each input in the form, and we only have 3 of them, right? We have to get the data for the description, the data for the amount, and the data for which of the 2 radio buttons we clicked. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to create 3 different states. One is going to be called description, one is going to be called transaction amount, and one is going to be called transaction type. Transaction type will be set to expense by default. I chose that because I think it makes sense, but you can change it to income, obviously. And all the other ones have just their initial values. So what we want is whenever there's a change in the description input, for example, so I'm going to put on change, I'm going to grab the event that is happening. And then I'm just going to set description as the event.target.value. I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with this approach of like kind of keeping track of values and inputs. This is the most standard approach. So this is how I'm going to be following this. I'm going to do the exact same thing for the amount, but instead of set description, we'll call it set the transaction amount, which is the other state we created. And finally, we're going to do the same thing for both radio inputs. Now it's a bit different for them because they have the same function. So set transaction type and set transaction type. Now, when we say event.target.value, this is going to refer to whatever value we put over here. And that's why I actually set a value, because now when you click on this radio button, it's going to set the transaction type to expense. And over here, it's going to set it to income. Now, the only other thing we really need to do in this form is the fact that whenever, it's saying use state is not defined. Let me just fix this real quick before I continue. I'm just going to import. I'm going to import at the top over here. Import from React. We want to import the use state hook, just like this. And you see, it seems to be working. But what I wanted to say is, even though we are keeping track of whether the expense or the income are being selected, you see we can first of all select both of them at the same time, which doesn't make sense. And also there's none of them selected by default, which doesn't make sense because I did set expense as the default value of the state. So what we want to do is we want to come over here, and to both the expense and the income radio, we want to add a checked property. Now, what this is going to refer to is if the transaction type is equal to, in this case, expense, then this input will be checked. If not, then it won't. Same thing with this one, but the difference is income. The difference that this makes is by default, the transaction type is expense, so it checks expense. But then if we switch to income, it's not expense anymore, so you can't select both of them at the same time. This is some basic form handling for radio buttons, but it's really cool that it works as simple as it does. Now we're pretty much done with our form. The reason for that is because we are indeed keeping track of the necessary information. So instead of brute forcing the data, we can just pass in the description, the transaction amount, and the transaction type, just like this. And we just save it. Now let's test to see if it's working. We only have one document in our collection, as you can see. So we're gonna add, let me pretend I bought a keyboard with the amount of $35. It's an expense. I'm gonna click add. We go over here. It seems to have added, and it seems to have kept track of the correct information. Let's try adding an income to see if it works as well. Let's say I sold a monitor, right? I'm gonna put monitor sold. eBay, I don't know. Let's pretend I sold it on eBay. And I sold it for $130. I'll change to income, I'll click add transaction, and we should see that the new transaction is a monitor sold and it is of transaction type income, which is pretty good. So our whole functionality of adding stuff seems to be working. This is not the hardest part yet, I'm sorry. So the hardest part is now, which is getting this data in the correct format. So this is gonna require a good amount of logic, but to be honest, it is not that complicated once you're done with it. You'll notice that everything makes sense, and it's a good practice for whenever you're working with stuff like this in general, right? So since it is a lot of logic, similar to the use add transaction, we're gonna create a custom hook for getting the transactions. So I'm gonna come over here, call this use get transactions, just like this. And over here, we're going to export const use get transactions. And inside of this hook, we're just going to, first of all, try to understand what we're going to return, right? We're going to first return the actual transactions. So it will be a list of the transactions that are in the database and that were made by the user currently logged in. So we will have to create some sort of state to keep track of these transactions. So we can already create that by coming over here and first importing the use state hook from React. I'm gonna say from React, use state, and I wanna create the transactions state and the set transactions function, right? This is going to be a list, so by default it will have a empty array. Now what I want to do is I want to create a function called get transactions. Now the reason why I want to create this function is not that we're gonna send this function as a return. We're not gonna return this function, and no one is gonna have access to this function. This function will actually only exist inside of this hook. The reason for this is because what I want to happen is whenever you load the expense tracker, it's gonna be constantly listening for new transactions at all times, referring to the current user. So you'll never have to call the get transactions because it will be happening consistently depending on if new transactions have been added. So what I want to do here is I actually want to call the use effect hook and put the get transactions inside of here, just like this. Now you might ask, oh, why did I create an external function called get transactions instead of just putting the logic that I'm going to write inside of here inside of the use effect? Well, because these get transactions have to be async because we're going to be dealing with Firebase inside of here, and we can't have an async function inside of a use effect, meaning that we can't just do this, right, and then use the await inside of here. We have to create an external function and then just call it inside of the use effect. And also because it will abstract the logic inside of here without having to put a bunch of random stuff inside of the use effect. Now, for the get transactions, it's actually kind of cool what we're going to do. We're going to do what is known as a query inside of our database. Now, it's going to be a bit different from a query, let's say, on a MySQL database, because this is NoSQL, right? But regardless, it's not that hard once you get used to it. I'll let you guys know that. So the first thing we want to do is we actually want to turn this into a try catch. Now the reason why I want to turn this into a try catch is because I want to be handling any errors that might occur inside of this function, right? And in case there's any errors, I'll just console.error the error message, just like this. And inside of the try, I'm gonna put all of the things that I want to attempt to do, and if any of them fail, it will be caught inside of this catch and it will just error them out, so it won't break our code. So inside of this try catch, the first thing I want to add is I want to make the query, and I'm going to call this query transactions, and I'm going to set this equal to something called query, which will automatically import from Firebase/Firestore. Then inside of here, I actually want to make a reference to which collection we want to query. So we're going to have to probably create something similar to what we did over here called transaction collection ref. I'm going to put this below here, and for that we also have to import collection from Firebase and db from our config file, right? So I'm going to put import go back twice and go to config and then Firebase config and then import the db variable. I also want to put both of this below the React import because I always like to have the React import at the top. And obviously I forgot to put from over here, and it should be working now. So we made a reference to our collection, and we're just going to put it over here. Then what else do we need? Well, we have to specify what query we want to make. So when you're making queries in Firestore, there's actually functions you can use in order to make the query work. So for example, what do we want to query here? Well, I want to query all the documents in this collection where the user ID field in each document is equal to the user ID of the user that is currently logged in. So I have to say something like this. Well, I want to query from this collection where is an actual function that you can import from Firestore, where the field user ID is, and then we put over here the actual operation we want to make on this where, and you can see there's a lot of operations you can use in Firebase, but the one we want is the double equal sign because we want to say that the user ID is equal to the user ID of the user. Now we don't have access to this variable yet. We have to import it from the hook that we created. And look how simple it will be because we already created that hook. All we have to do is just import from /useget user info import the useGetUserInfo hook, and then just straight up const equal to useGetUserInfo, and just get the user ID with no need to get any of that other information. Then we'll just pass it over here. Finally, we also want to order the transactions, and this is more a personal reason, but we created the created@ property and we added to each of the documents. So we can just say that we want to order this by, and then specify the created@ field, right? This one over here, and it will return all the transactions ordered by that. So I'll save this. Now that we have our query transactions variable, I want to do something called onSnapshot. So onSnapshot is a function that comes from Firebase, as you can see, and it will basically keep tracking for a query if there is changes. So we'll pass in this query over here, and we'll then have a callback function called snapshot with a snapshot argument, in it. And whatever you put over here is whatever data you get back from the current snapshot of this query. So inside of this, it contains the data that we need for the users. So it's going to be a list, right? Because we're querying documents, multiple documents. So we'll probably have to loop through this list. So I'm going to say snapshot for each. And if you're not familiar with for each, it's basically going to loop through each element in an array, in this case, the snapshot array, and give you back a callback function containing each specific element. And each specific element will be the document that you need. So in order to get the data from this document, we can actually separate it like this. Create a variable called data and set it equal to doc.data, just like this. It's a function that, oh, I'm sorry, I should have put an equal sign. It's actually a function that will return back exactly this over here. But also, I also want to have an ID for each specific document. So for each specific transaction, I want to have an ID, and Firebase already gives us an ID. If we say doc.id, it will give us a unique ID for each individual document. So I'm going to do that like this. Const ID equal to doc.id. And it's not a function, so it's just a variable. I can just do it like this. Then what I want to do is I want to have some sort of array called docs, which is going to keep track of each of the documents that we want inside of this onSnapshot function. Now, the reason why we're doing this way is because, and not just straight up saying something like set transactions equal to snapshot, since this is already the array of documents, is because it's not in the format we want. What we want is an array containing an object that is going to contain all of this information together with the ID and much more. But we don't have that right now. Snapshot gives us a lot of data, and we want to condense that data. That's why we're looping through each of the elements in the array and separating all of the information for each of the documents and adding them to this docs array. Now we can just say docs.push, and we're going to push in an object containing the data, right? Data is already an object that is going to contain all of this, but also we want to add the ID for the collection. It's not contained in data, it's contained in this ID variable. So we're also going to add the ID inside of this object. And now we should have the correct data filtered, right? So that means that after the snapshot is done, right, we can actually come over here and just set transactions equal to docs, because docs will now have the correct data that we want, and we can just set it like this. So this is pretty much done. The only difference is we need to actually clean up this function after we're done, clean up the use effect. So I'm gonna let this be equal to unsubscribe and set it equal to, oh, I wrote this completely wrong, and set it equal to onSnapshot. If you're not familiar with this really doesn't matter, just to return over here at the bottom the cleanup function, which we'll just call the unsubscribe function. Now this doesn't really matter if you're not familiar with what I'm doing, but oh wait, oh, it's because I'm defining this. I need to define this above the try catch. So I'll say let unsubscribe, and this should be working. So now at the bottom, we're returning transactions. This hook is not done. Trust me, it's not done, but it already has a lot of its initial functionality finished. So I do want to test it out to see if it's working. I'll come to our index.js and I'll import the hook over here at the top. I'll say use get transactions and use get transactions. Then I'll just const transactions over here. Oh, actually changes to use get transactions, and then just get the transactions directly. And with this, what I can do is I can come over here at the bottom, right over here, and below the transactions, I want to add a list, an unordered list for each transaction. So for each transaction, I'm going to loop, right? I'm going to say transactions.map. So we're going to loop through the list, and we're going to grab an individual transaction. Then we're going to return back for each transaction a list, right? A list item, which is going to contain, first of all, an h4 tag, which is going to just display the description of the transaction. So we can grab this by saying either transaction.description, right? Because transaction will contain the description. But also, since we're going to be using a lot of the individual items of transaction multiple times, I actually want to, before returning this, I want to destructure each transaction by saying const transaction and getting the description, the transaction amount, and the transaction type, which are the three things that I actually want to display for each individual transaction. Then, instead of saying transaction.description, I can just use the variable directly. Then what I want to do is I want to display both the transaction amount and also the transaction type by first coming over here and adding the money sign, as you can see, and then saying transaction amount. And then I want to add this little dot over here and just add a label, which is going to contain the transaction type, as you can see. Now, let's check to see if this is actually working. It should, but it seems to not be working. Let's check out what is happening. It says that, oh yeah, the query here requires creating an index. I completely forgot about this, but yeah, this is something you do have to do. To be honest, I only remember that I have to create an index when working with queries in Firebase whenever I get this console log, because it doesn't matter. They automatically do it for you. An index, it doesn't really matter for you. You don't have to understand it fully. Just know that you have to create one, and you create one by clicking on this button, and they will automatically do it for you when you sign in with your account associated with your Firebase project. So I will sign in with the email account. It will open this up. It will ask create or update indexes, and it will automatically put all of the things you need to create this index. You'll click save and it will build. You do have to wait for the status to be completed in order to make this work, but it should go pretty quick. Okay, so as you can see, it now says status enabled, which means that if I refresh this, the transactions should appear here. So I'll refresh this and they do, right? As you can see, all the transactions appear over here. Obviously they look really ugly, but to be honest, it doesn't really matter. This is how it looks so far, and the code seems to be working. One thing I do want to do though, it is kind of styling, but it's not CSS directly. I'm actually doing it over here. Is I actually want to add a color to this label, so that the color of the text is dependent on the transaction type. Now the color I want it to be, well, if transaction type is equal to expense, well, I want the color to be red. And if not, if it's anything else, such as income, I want it to be green. So let's try this out. You'll see that now it does change the color depending on the transaction type. Now this is pretty much done, right? Kinda. But we do need to put information related to the user inside of here. Now, what I want to do is I'm gonna add a bunch of the CSS that like I've done personally. And the reason why I want to do this is because for the rest of the video, I want the website to kind of look cool. So I'll just copy and paste the CSS that I already have done and just kind of glance over it so you guys can take a look. But again, I'm not going to go step by step and build it because it would waste too much time in the video. But basically how I would write CSS here is for each individual page inside of the folders, I would create a styles.css file, right? And this is obviously the case in which you're working with pure CSS. If I was using something else like Sass, or if I was using Tailwind CSS, everything would be completely different. But in this case, I would do something like this. I would create an individual styles.css file for each individual page or each thing that I want to have styles for. And then I would just put the individual styles over here. And then on the respective pages, such as this one over here, this is the expense tracker, I would just import /styles.css. And I would do the same thing for the auth one over here. So I'll be back in a second when all of the CSS has been pasted. Okay, as you can see, I pasted all of the CSS. This is the CSS for the login, the authentication page. It's pretty simple, nothing major. Then this one is for the expense tracker, and just to make everything kind of look smoothly. You can see that this is how the website kind of looks right now. If I were to go to the auth page, this is kind of how it looks. Oh, I just noticed I forgot to add one thing, which is there's kind of like a border by default in React apps. So what I usually like to do is I usually like to come to the app.css and just add body, padding is equal to 0, and margin is equal to 0. Now that should fix it up. But as you can see, we can come over here, sign in with Google, choose the option. So I'll just choose this option over here, log in, and you can see we have our expenses. But one thing we don't have is it doesn't say the user's username over here, right? And it doesn't show the profile picture. So I'm gonna add that right now. So in order to get that information, we already have a hook for it, right? We've been playing around with this for a while. It's called useGetUserInfo, right? So I'll come to the expense tracker one, and I'm gonna import that hook at the top. So I'll just copy this, paste it over here, change this to useGetUserInfo, and change this to useGetUserInfo. And then over here, I can literally just destructure whatever I need. In previous examples, we destructured the user ID from this hook. But in this case, we really don't need that. We only need the display name, or the name, the profile photo, and do we need anything else? No, we don't need the isAuth, right? We just need those two things. So for the name, what I want to do is, over here, it says expense tracker. I want to kind of customize it by putting the name over here and then putting an apostrophe S. So it's going to be like Pedro Machado's, which is my name, expense tracker. Oh, in this case, yeah, this is a fake email account. I made it as Tez Mosby. Those who get the reference will understand this. But yeah, like it seems to be working. We've put the name over here. But then for the profile picture, it's a little bit harder. It's not that it's hard, it's just that we haven't set up like the proper thing for it yet. So where we're gonna set this up is above, below the form, below this div, but not inside of transactions. We're actually gonna say that if there is a profile photo, then, because remember, we're getting this information from the Gmail account, and maybe you don't have a profile picture in your Gmail account. So we can't guarantee. So I'm gonna put over here, if you have a profile picture, then I'm gonna give a class name of profile. It's good that I've pasted the CSS because now I just have to give the correct class names and the styling will automatically go. So the image will be like this. I'll give a class name for this image and call it profile photo. And then all I need to do is the source will be whatever we got back from Google. So I'll put profile photo. And I'll save this. You'll see that the profile photo should appear over here. But I also want to add on top of that some sort of functionality or some sort of button that we can click to actually sign out. That's something that I don't know if you guys noticed, but we haven't done yet. I want to be able to sign out in case it's necessary. So we're going to come over here and add a button for signing out. We'll just write sign out and we'll put a class name over here as sign out button. And then I'll put an on click and we'll create a function called sign user out. And we'll have to create that function right now. Const sign user out. Well, to sign out is actually extremely simple. It's straightforward. You guys won't have any worries with this. It's basically with Firebase, there's a specific function called sign out. If I press enter, it will automatically import it from Firebase Auth. Let me just put this below the use state. And this function is as simple as it can be. We're gonna just say actually we'll just say await sign out, and we just have to pass in over here the auth variable that we have in our Firebase config file. So inside of this file over here, and then it's gonna actually sign out. But what we want to do is we want to try catch this so that we know if it's successful or not, because sometimes it might not be, right? So if there's any errors, we're just gonna console.error this error. But actually you'll call it error like this. But one thing to notice is that if there's any error in signing out, this is what's going to be handled. It's going to, like immediately leave this block and go to this one. So if there is no error, by putting the try catch, we can assume that every line after the await sign out will mean that it has successfully logged out, which means we have to do some cleanup. For example, I want to clear the local storage because now we don't have a user signed in, right? So that information in local storage is useless and it should be cleared. Not only that, but now I want to navigate towards, I want to navigate towards the initial page, the login page. And to do that, all we have to do is just similar to what we've done already in the past, is we have to import from React Router DOM, and we import the use navigate hook. And then over here, we just const navigate is equal to use navigate. And then you guys should know this should redirect us to this page. Let's check out to see if this is working. So you can see the styling for the button. I had put that in the CSS, but we should check the actual application. So we do have a user logged in, as you can see over here. But if I click sign out, not only I get redirected back to the login page, but this has been cleared. So I'll log in again, and then I'll click this, and you should see that we're logged in again. One thing that we have to do, and it's probably the final thing we have to do, is handle this thing over here, right? We have a bunch of expenses and a bunch of income, but how are we going to do this? If you are interested in actually practicing your skills, I want to challenge you guys to do this on your own and then come back to see if, if you're able to do this, you guys know what is supposed to be here, right? This should be the total balance. So the net income and expenses, this should be just the income, and this should be just the expenses. Well, try doing this on your own. If you succeed, then good job. Then check out my version and see if, how different they are. But if you want to just watch this, I'll be showing you guys how to do this right now. So in order to write this functionality, we're going to go back to the use get transactions hook. I want to put that over here. Now, the reason why I want to put this over here is because there's a couple ways to actually do this, which is kind of interesting. So you could create a table or collection in your database to keep track of the total income, total expenses, and total balance, right, in general. And then every time there's a transaction for a specific person, you could just add or subtract that value. But there's another approach which is easier because we don't have to have another collection. It might scale less properly because it's something you're handling in the front end, but it's perfectly fine in my opinion. And this approach is the following. First of all, I want to create a state that is going to keep track of all the information we need. So it's going to be called transaction total, or transaction totals. I don't know if that English is correct, but it's fine. So this is going to be actually an object, not an array. And this object is going to contain both the balance, which is going to start at 0.0, then the income, which is going to start at 0.0 as well, and the expenses, which is going to start at 0.0. Now I'm doing 0.0 because we do want it to look like this. It doesn't go 0.0 because it's prettier, but 0.0 should be fine because we also accept decimals, right? Then what I want to do is I want to come over here into where we're dealing with our transactions. And if you recall, for this over here should return a list. A snapshot is a list of all the documents in this database, in this collection, where the ID is equal to the user ID who's logged in. So that's perfect for us because we want to get the total income and the total expense and the balance from that specific user. So all we have to do is manipulate this data a little bit so that we can keep track of those two pieces of information. So I can say, let total income equal to 0. We're initializing this variable. And I'm going to do the same thing with total expenses equal to 0. And then over here, after we push, right, we've done that part of like just adding them to the array and listing the transactions. After that, I want to do a little bit of a calculation. Well, if we're dealing with a transaction type equal to an expense. So if this is an expense, then what I want to do is I want to increase the total expenses by the actual transaction type. So data.transaction type or transaction amount. Sorry about that. Transaction amount. Well, if it's not an expense, it's definitely an income. So I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to do total income, just like this. And this over here will be, since we're getting it from an input, like a HTML input, it's actually going to be represented as a string. So we do have to convert it into a number so that we can add it properly. So I'm going to come over here, turn this into a number as well, and this should be working fine. You'll see that in the end, when this loop is done, we're going to basically have total income and total expenses as the correct values, right, for that specific user. Now, what we can do is, right after we set the transactions, right, we can also set our transaction totals. So we'll say set transaction totals, and we'll make it such that the balance, well, we haven't dealt with the balance yet. I'll for now set it to 0, but then the total income and total expenses will be both set over here. So total income as well. And what we do for the balance is actually pretty simple, right? It's the net value. So what we can do is we can just let balance equal to total income minus total expenses. That's simple, I don't know, economics, simple math. Balance is equal to the income, the positive minus the negative, right? So what we have now is an object in a state containing the total balance, the total expenses, and the total income. And what that means is that at the end over here, we now also return back the transaction totals state. And we'll come over here to our expense tracker component, and we will get back from the useGetTransactions the transaction totals as well. Now, there's a couple of things we want to do with transaction totals. So what I like to do is I'll actually destructure the three values because I think it will be easier to play around with them. So I'll set const equal to transaction totals, and similar to how we've been doing over here, since it's an object, I can just get the balance, the total income, and the total expenses like this. I'm not sure why these values are not correctly being distributed. Let me take a look at this. Oh, it's called income, not total income. So I'm sorry about this, guys, but it should be expenses is equal to total expenses, and income is equal to total income. Sorry if you guys noticed this first. If so, that's pretty good. But over here, we just have to grab the income and the expenses. Perfect. Now, what I need to do is we'll come down here at the bottom, and we'll first start working with the balance. So with the balance, and first, I'm actually going to leave the balance for later. We'll first work with the income. So for the income, what we're going to do is we're going to delete the preset amount over here. We're going to leave the money sign to be in front. And over here, we're just going to say income. Literally just this. And you'll see that now the income should appear over here, right? 187, which to be honest, it doesn't seem right. It actually seems like it's adding everything. Is it? Actually, it doesn't, but it's weird that it says 187, right? I'll just put the expenses and then check out to see what happened. But that was the income. Now for the expenses, we'll do the exact same thing. Let's check out to see if the expenses is working. So we'll check over here, and it is not working. What does this mean? Well, we'll check out what we did wrong. This is actually a good exercise because I've said this a bunch of times already. I enjoy whenever I make a mistake in a video like this because I can just show you guys how I debug. So it says total income equal to 0, total expenses equal to 0. And it seems like we've been properly checking this and properly increasing this amount. Let's test to see what the value of total expenses and total income seems to be after each iteration. So we'll say console log total expenses right next to total income after each loop. We'll open up our console log over here and we'll check. So first, it definitely checks for the expense 22, 57, and 87. So it seems like it's increasing the income instead of the expenses. Yeah, because say 22 is the first one, and then it treats 35 as an income. Am I making some mistake that is really dumb? Well, I am. I actually just noticed. And this is actually a good example to why you should use TypeScript. I wrote transaction wrong, and you guys might have already figured this out, but I literally wrote transactions wrong. So this should be transaction type, and I hope this works. Yeah, it does work. So if you got annoyed at me because I was not seeing the mistake I made, I'm sorry, but this is debugging real time, and I hope you guys can see that. Even I can make a really dumb mistake like this. But bottom line, we're now seeing the expenses and the income. Then all we have left is just to calculate the balance, and the balance will be pretty simple, but also kind of interesting. We already have the value for balance, but I want to show you guys what the problem with that is. I'm going to come over here and put balance, right? And balance, it says correctly $73, but balance, differently from income and expenses, it can actually be negative, right? Expenses is a negative, but when you say, oh, I have $80 of expenses, you never say, oh, I have negative $80 of expenses. But if you have a negative balance, you say, oh, I have negative $73. So the problem with this is the way we structured. If I were to come over here and say that I went to McDonald's, right, and I ordered $200 worth of McDonald's, and I edit this transaction, it now says that it is negative 127, but the negative sign is not in front of the money sign. Well, that's not that big of a deal, but I want to show you guys how to fix that. And it's pretty simple, to be honest. You just come over here. You first ask, oh, is the balance, is it greater than or equal to 0? Because if it is, then I know for a fact it's positive, and I can just display the actual balance. But if it's not greater than or equal to 0, that means it's negative. So I'll actually display an H2 tag, just like this, but I'll put the negative sign in front. And the problem with this yet, there's one more thing I have to do. The problem with this is because now it's double negative. So you have to make sure that the balance is actually, the number is positive. So I'll multiply this number by -1. And you'll see that it now correctly says the amount. I can also, for some reason, work at McDonald's. So I'll put McDonald's salary and I'll earn something that will make this positive, $500. Change this to income and you'll see that now it is positive. If I were to, I don't know, let's pretend I got sued and I have to pay a settlement of, I don't know, an absurd amount, right? Now it's an expense. Let's add this. And yeah, I'm negative 39,627. Also with the CSS, I added this cool thing where you can scroll if the information inside is overflowing. That's pretty simple. You can check out the code as well. But yeah, there's definitely other things you could add here. For example, you could add the comma over here, but those things, to be honest, I don't really care about that much. You can also clear this inputs if you wanted to. That could be kind of cool. To be honest, I might do that right now just because, I mean, you guys are already here. I'll just show you how to do this real quick. So to do that, all you have to do is go to the individual inputs, set a value to them. So for example, this is the description input. I set the value equal to the description state. I'll do the same thing with the amount one, but set it to the transaction amount, right? And then whenever we actually add, right, we add a transaction at the end, I'll just set those two states to be an empty string, and that will kind of clear out the input, right? So I'll just do this, and you'll see that if I were to come over here and say, let's say I won the lottery. So I'll put lottery. I'll say that I won this amount, right? Now, not only worked, but it also cleared both inputs. I also just remembered something that I still have to do, and I don't think you guys even noticed that this was missing. It's just the fact that if I close this and I went over here and opened it again, you would see that although I am logged in, it's asking me to sign in with Google again. And the reason for this mistake, which is not really a mistake, is just because we're not redirecting in case the user is already authenticated. If you recall, when we created our local storage item, we actually created a property called isAuth. Let me try to open this up. I don't know if it will even get there. I can, it doesn't matter. You guys remember that I created this property called isAuth. It's literally in our code. So what I want to do is I actually want to, whenever you go to the authentication page, I wanted to check to see if you're already authenticated, because if you are, then I wanted to redirect you to the expense tracker page. Now, how do we get the information if you're authenticated or not? Well, we import that hook, right? So import from two slashes, and then hooks, use get user info, import use get user info. We're gonna const equal to use get user info, and we're gonna import the isAuth variable. And there's one thing that I wanted to show you guys. I've been showing to you guys throughout the whole video that with React DOM you can navigate by calling this function like this. But the problem with this is, in this case, how would I navigate by this, right? How would I do that? Well, there's a couple ways of doing it. I could actually create a use effect over here, right? Something like this, and just check, oh, if is auth, then call the navigate function. This would work. But there's another way, and I wanted to show you guys, which is to actually use a component from React DOM called the navigate component. So there's these two ways that you can actually do this, and it's cool that I can do both of them and in their respective use cases inside of this component. This component, navigate, is really simple. You just say, oh, if is auth is true, then return the navigate component, and you can put a prop over here saying to, and then you put the string saying expense tracker. It's basically the same thing, but it serves for cases like this where you want to redirect because of some sort of condition immediately when this specific component has been rendered, right? So in this case, the condition is, oh, if isAuth is true, we don't even have to check whatever is below here because we already want to navigate towards this component. And we can check that this works because I was on the other page, right? I can even try to go to the other page, but it will automatically redirect me back to this one, right? So everything seems to be working. So yeah, that's basically it. The last thing I want to do is not related to the code, it's just deploying this application. So if you recall, in the beginning of the video, we actually got some instructions on how to deploy. The instructions included, we put it over here, included running Firebase login, Firebase init, and Firebase deploy. Like in the beginning of the video, I told you guys to install the Firebase tools CLI. We've done that already, so we're not going to do that again. But if you haven't, I would recommend trying the Firebase login command and seeing if you are logged in. In my case, I'm already logged in. So now what we have to do is we actually have to first create a build version of our project. If you've ever deployed anything in the past, you know that that's a good thing for you to do. When you build, it will create this build folder over here in your project. And when it's done, it kind of creates an optimized version of your project inside of this folder. And this is what we're going to actually send to Firebase to deploy. Since we've done that, we're just going to run Firebase init. And it's actually going to start asking us a bunch of questions. And this is where things get a little bit confusing, but stick around with me and you'll see how it's done. So basically, it's going to first ask what features do you want to set up for this directory. So there's a bunch of options over here. And the one I want is, well, think about it this way. What do I want? I want to have Firestore as an option. I want to have hosting as an option. I want to have a bunch of those things, right? But technically what it's really asking here is what I want to set up right now, right? So I want to set up hosting. And out of the options, the one that I want is the first one, the hosting configure files for Firebase hosting and optionally set up GitHub action deploys. So to choose that, I'm going to press space. It's going to become green, as you can see, and then I want to press enter. Now it's going to ask to select an option. I'm even going to zoom in a little bit so you guys can see everything better. It's going to say, do you want to use an existing project, create a new project, add to an existing Google Cloud Platform project? But no, to be honest, we just want to use an existing project because we already created it in our console. So I'm choosing the first option. Then it's going to list all of the options of projects that we have inside of our application. And we have to choose which one we want to deploy. So I know I have two. I should just have one expense tracker. Let me just make sure. The way we make sure which project we're talking about is we'll actually check out this thing over here in the URL. It's the name of your project. This one ends with D14E8. So that's the one. So that's the one I want to choose. I'll come over here. I'll choose this one. Press enter. Then it's going to ask, do you want to use public as your public directory? Yes, we've actually already built this thing. So we're going to press enter. Then configure a single page app. I'm just going to press enter as the default option. Then set automatic builds and deploys at GitHub. I want to press yes for this because we're going to set up our GitHub account such that whenever you push any code into a GitHub repository, it will automatically trigger a redeploy, meaning that if you make changes to your project and you merge them into your main branch, it will automatically redeploy for all of your users. That's how actual websites usually work. There's obviously more checking and more stuff in the pipeline before going public, but in this case, it will look something very similar. Then it's gonna ask, okay, the file public/index.html already exists. Do you wanna override it? I'm gonna put no. I'm gonna press enter and it's gonna open up the GitHub login for this application. It actually opened up in a different monitor for me, but I've already connected my GitHub account with my Firebase CLI, so it's already done. But in your case, it might prompt up for you to log in with GitHub so that you connect both. And now what it's asking is what GitHub repository inside of our GitHub account do we want to basically connect our Firebase project with. So we're going to go to GitHub right now, github.com, and we're going to open up, this is my account. I'm going to create a new repository right in front of you guys. I'm going to click on new repository over here. I'm going to give it a name as expense tracker Firebase React. I don't know. I'm just calling it this because this is the name of the repository for the code you guys will probably have access to in the description. Then I'm just going to click create repository. It's going to give us a bunch of options as usual when you deploy something. I'm going to actually open up Visual Studio Code and I'm going to open up a new terminal. This is going to be the terminal we're going to be using to deploy this app into a repository, right? So I'm going to run git init, then I'm going to say git add dot. Then I'm just going to copy all of this stuff over here and paste it over there, just like this. Hopefully everything works out with GitHub. It seems to have worked out, and I refresh this and you should see that all of the code is over here. Now that our code is displayed inside of this repository, we actually, if we look back at the commands said by Firebase, the Firebase CLI, it says that we need to enter here exactly in the format of a username and / a repository. What repository do we want to connect? So what it means is basically we have to copy this part of the URL over here. So all we have to do here is just paste that information and then press enter. It's going to retrieve the information from our repository. And when it's done, it's going to ask, okay, do you want to set up a workflow to run a build script before every deploy? Well, in this case, we don't want to do that. So I'm going to press no or N, and it will say no. Then it's going to say set up automatic deployment to your site's live channel when a PR is merged. So yes, we do want that. So I'm going to press enter. By the way, I press enter and write sometimes because the default option is capitalized on this thing. So in this case, the Y was capitalized. So yes was the default option, and it was the one that we want. So that's pretty good. Finally, it's going to ask, what is the name of the GitHub branch associated with your site's live channel? Well, basically, if you have multiple branches, it's going to ask which one you want to actually be the one that when everything is merged is going to trigger a redeploy. In our case, we only have one branch. So I'm just going to press enter because by default, it's already the main branch. And as you can see, it says Firebase initialization complete. If all has worked so far, this means that if I just run Firebase deploy, everything should be deployed inside of our project. Let's check out. I just pressed that on and it seems like it is indeed working. We're going to click on the hosting URL to see if it is working. And let's see. Well, it's kind of empty right now. It doesn't seem to be showing anything. But while that is loading, I think there's no problem with it. And I think it's just a matter of like seconds before that actually starts working. I'm actually going to copy the project console. If you don't know, this is where basically the information related to your projects and how it's running, if it's deployed or not, this is where you can see it. So far, it seems that it's not working, but it says that it has been deployed. Okay guys, so I actually figured out what the problem was, and it was a stupid one. It was my mistake, but I'm gonna show you guys what it was. So I want you to actually run Firebase init again and go through this again. But since you guys have already done it, it's pretty quick. Choose hosting. Then on this part over here, instead of just going for your public directory to be public, actually choose build, and this was my mistake. I forgot that I ran yarn build before and that our project will actually be in the build folder, not in the public one. So I'll just write build, press enter. Then for this, we'll just continue what we did before. We want to set that up. Build index.html already exists. You want to overwrite. I'm going to press no. And then it's going to ask for authentication. Like we've said before, we've already done it. It's also going to ask for again, for the GitHub account. I'm just going to do the same thing for the GitHub repository. Paste it here, press enter. Then it's going to connect to GitHub. And then it's going to ask the same questions we've had before. And then for this, I'll just put yes. I think it's the same question as before. Now, initialization complete. Now, finally, I'll just put Firebase deploy. Press enter. And it should be done. One thing to note, the reason why I actually made this mistake is because Firebase deployment seems to have changed. So the changes that I had before doesn't really work anymore. So I'll just copy that link, and actually I already have it here. I'll refresh it, and the icon changed, meaning that it was deployed, but it's still blank. So let's check this out. Can't read name. Okay, yeah. But there seems to be a bug here. So I'll inspect element, console. It says that cannot get properties null of reading name from use get user info. Let's check this out. So I'm pretty sure I know what that is. I think somewhere this is where name is, right? Yeah, this thing over here is actually a problem, because if local storage doesn't have an item and it parses it, there won't be an item called name to actually return, right? And it's not just name. If I delete a name over here and left it like this, the error would say profile photo. It's just that it's the first thing, and then it stopped looking at the other errors. So what I have to do here is I actually have to put a condition saying a fallback, saying that if this returns null, it's still an object and I can still destructure a name from it. But the problem is that even if it's an empty object, it can try to destructure name even though it won't exist in it. So this will fix the issue, I believe. I'll save this, run yarn build, and then remember that if you're gonna deploy, right, you always have to yarn build, because that's the version that Firebase uses to actually host your project. And then I'm just gonna run Firebase deploy. Now the reason why I'm running Firebase deploy instead of just pushing to GitHub, which I will right now, I'll actually do it right now, is because, to be honest, I just want, when you push to GitHub, it will, oh, I just have to fix this. So when you push to GitHub, it will trigger a deploy, but it might take a bit. In my case, I just wanted a quick deploy to show you guys that this is going to be working. If I will refresh this over here, hopefully, as you can see, our project seems to be live. And the good thing is, if I try to sign in and I use the same email account I used in my testing, so like in the non-live version, the data should still be there. As you can see, it's still there because it's all connected into the same database, right? And it seems to all be working. So this is basically it for the video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe, because I'm actually going to be posting once every 2 weeks, I believe. The reason is I decided to change the way I approach my videos. This video specifically is a little bit longer, and I kind of like that. The reason for that is because if I make longer videos, I have a brand new group of videos that I couldn't make before because of my fast-paced schedule. And a lot of the videos you guys have been asking me for years now, I couldn't make it because I had to post every week. But now I'm gonna have a lot more time to do so. Not to mention, I'm fully graduated now from university. So I'm gonna be starting work full time. For those who don't know, I'm gonna be working for Twitch in about a month. So I believe I'll also have more time because I do think school takes more time than full-time work. Which is crazy, but I will have more time and I'll be making videos like this. This is also my first video after a hiatus of almost a month, and I'm really happy to be back. I'm really happy to be full on devoted to this, and I'm really excited to produce really good content for you guys. Again, if you're interested in checking out the code, it will all be in the description. I wanted to thank Skillshare again for sponsoring this video. Really enjoy the platform. Have been using it for years and have been working with them for years now. So I really enjoy that they gave me this opportunity. So that's basically it. Really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.